All right, welcome. My name is Sujin Pak, and I am Dean of the School of Theology, and it's my great joy to welcome you to this evening's event. Many have partnered together to bring you this evening's exciting program. The Lowell Lectures this year are offered in collaboration with Dr. Shelley Rambo's Lilly Endowment Grant initiative called Trauma-Informed Theological Education. And this grant and this series of things focus on the theme of trauma as it is impacting congregations, seminarians, and theological education. You may recall that last fall we heard from Dr. Micah McCreary. He spoke on leading through and beyond wounds. And tonight our distinguished speaker is Dr. Kate Ott, whose lecture is entitled Remedy or Replication, AI Companions and Relational Trauma. Thank you, Dr. Ott, for sharing of your vision and talents with us this evening. I offer my profound gratitude to the Lowell Institute for making this lecture series and many of our annual lecture series possible. The Lowell Institute's generous support has enabled the Lowell Lectures as a long-standing tradition at the School of Theology, and we're grateful to the Lowell Institute's visionary stewardship in fostering a space of learning, awareness, and conversation. Thank you. I also offer my hearty thanks to the GBH Forum Network for broadcasting and archiving this special event. And of course, I cannot forget our own Andrew Kimball for all of his organizational gifts and leadership. Dr. Shelley Rambo is serving as our moderator for this evening's program. And Dr. Rambo is a member of 2 grant teams seeking to broaden research and education pertaining to strengthen preparation and awareness of faith leaders concerning trauma's impact on themselves as well as on their communities. These 2 grants are the Trauma Responsive Congregations Grant funded by the Lilly Endowment and what I mentioned already, the Trauma-Informed Theological Education that's funded by the Global Board of Higher Education and Ministry of the United Methodist Church. Dr. Rambo has worked on initiatives stemming from these grants alongside esteemed colleagues, Dr. Nicolette Manglos-Weber, Dr. Steve Standage, Dr. David Cho, and Dr. Eric Brown, the latter of whom is, I think, with us tonight as one of the respondents. Yes, thank you. Thank you for being with us as well. Dr. Shelley Rambo is professor of theology and author of multiple books, including Spirit and Trauma, A Theology of Resurrecting Wounds is a second book, Living in the Afterlife of Trauma, and a forthcoming book, Sustaining Spirits on the Open Sea, Meaning-Making from Sites of Care. She is a notable scholar of chaplaincy studies, a faculty leader for our School of Theology's chaplaincy track, and just an incredible teacher, scholar, and leader of this school. So please join me in inviting Dr. Rambo as she will invite the other panelists and introduce them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Pak. It's good to see so many in the room and those online. I have the privilege of introducing a colleague and a graduate school friend. Not often you get to do that. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Ott, and then she'll speak, and then I'll introduce later the panelists. So Dr. Kate Ott is a feminist religious ethicist addressing the formation of moral communities with specializations in technology, youth and young adults, sexuality, pedagogy, and professional ethics. She's the author of Sex, Tech, and Faith, Ethics for a Digital Age, and Christian Ethics for a Digital Society, in addition to an edited volume that may be of interest to many in this room, Teaching Sexuality and Religion in Higher Education. She is also the author of Sex and Faith, Talking to Your Child from Birth to Adolescence. She is Jerre and Mary Joy Stead Professor of Christian Social Ethics at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary and the Director of the Stead Center for Ethics and Values at Garrett Theological Seminary. Dr. Ott has been out front on some of the most tangled issues for communities of faith. She has studied how faith leaders can engage with these pressing issues and reimagines congregations and seminary and higher education classrooms as primary sites for engaging these questions. She has written primers in theological ethics, and she is presently, I think, rewriting one to keep up with the current issues related to our digital lives. I want to emphasize that it's the posture of Dr. Ott's work that I really want to underscore. With a lot of negative messaging coming out of religious spaces of sexuality, of suspicion, and even fear of AI, Dr. Ott is positive and affirmative. She raises questions about our digital lives, but it never feels judgmental. I recall words from her introduction to the digital ethics book, encouraging churches who may have concerns or may just do a bad job of talking about sex. Her words that kind of end the introduction is, "We can do better." So I welcome my colleague, friend, and you are just in for an amazing time with her. So welcome, Dr. Ott.
Thank you to those of you at BU, to dean, faculty, colleagues, friends. It's always a little daunting as well to give your lecture in front of your PhD advisor, who's also here. And also thank you to those students who I know were told perhaps by your professor, hey, you should come tonight. Maybe you get extra credit, whatever it is. I hope this is interesting to you if it didn't sound like something you were going to show up for in the beginning. I do want to admit that AI chose this image. And I say that to help you think about some of the issues already. What is it? How is whatever it is that Microsoft's Copilot within PowerPoint thinks about these words and the kind of image that should accompany them? The title of our talk captures what I believe is a current limited imagination of the dominant design features of AI companions. Will they remedy our social relational ills? Or will they replicate, perhaps exacerbate them? Sadly, the current dominant designs of desired futures look like a return or entrenchment of certain stereotypes of perfection that are fed, I believe, by ideas of labor, race, gender, and intelligence that are grounded in problematic Christian histories. Before anyone assumes that this topic is niche, let's consider some statistics on the use of AI companions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the statistics, but I'm going to give you visuals of certain AI models that someone might use as it relates to those. Each of them is a website you can go and look up more information if you like. And at some point, if we want to talk about which models they are or what they suggest, we can do that during the Q&A. The Harvard Business Review study by Mark Zao Sanders finds that therapy/companionship has launched to the top spot for AI use. This category includes use case scenarios that exhibit a wide range of companionship, like generating a friend or a lover to replace perhaps one that has scorned you, or to find a therapist. Similarly, the Counterfeit Connections report sampled nearly 3,000 US adults in 2025, and they found that AI romantic companions AI companion use was highest among young adults. Nearly 1 in 3 young adult men and 1 in 4 young adult women reported that they have chatted with an AI girlfriend or boyfriend. Oftentimes, this is in response to other failed offline relationships or failed online services that are no longer yielding the results people seek. According to the Mental Health in an AI World report, 41% of adults have turned to AI chat agents for emotional or psychological support. Among people with a diagnosed mental health condition, that number rises to 48%. However, more than 80% of those conversations happen on general purpose platforms. So they might happen on something like friend.com, which is not meant for therapy, but they're not happening on sites like EarKick, which are designed using cognitive behavioral therapy models. They're happening on ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, Perplexity, you name it, right? Because those are much more widely available and free, and people aren't doing the work to find an AI model built for its purpose. This comes at a time when major AI developers report shifting their attention to agentic models for business rather than companion-trained models. So if we already have a bit of a problem that people aren't using models trained for the purpose, and developers are going to shift to follow major use in companies, we're going to have fewer models designed for those kinds of purposes. And people may resort to using agentic models designed for business, task kind of to-do lists. Their hope in switching this model, Workday found that in a recent study, that responsible deployment of AI agents is a top priority for business leadership. 75% of employees are comfortable working with AI agents, and 82% of organizations are planning on expanding their use of AI agents. So the likelihood that your coworker or perhaps your additional teacher will be AI is fairly likely. These last two examples are agents or AI models that have the capacity to work on a task without human instruction or supervision. Our previous examples, generally speaking, are reacting to rather than initiating actions. These collegial AI agents are built with Fordist values. Okay. Okay, we'll see. I also am a fairly low-tech person who talks about tech. So if we don't have them, we don't need them. Okay, so these two AI agents that I'm showing you are specifically designed as agentic, right? They are designed to be able to run task flows on their own and not constantly be reacting to a human prompt. They work on technologics of efficiency, individualism, and progress. And in this case, Victor can work 24/7. Oh. Well, Get Victor is a tool, not a tool, a hire, a new person for you to work with. These collegial AI agents built on this Fordist model presumably don't have to or won't be like your junior human assistant who can't physically do all of this and doesn't require a lot of training. You want me to stop or you want me to keep going? Okay. I did have this great image of a billboard that was posted by a podcaster in the Bristol airport. And it was over like the check-in desks at the airport. And it's a woman who is like white woman, half photo, half like sci-fi solar system design, right? And on the half human side of it, there's like WhatsApp, a telephone, and like a computer prompter. And it says, she outworks everyone, and she'll never ask for a raise. Meet your new AI employee. Always on, never sick, and no HR required. Right? Which should conjure all these thoughts in your mind right now. Perfect, there she is, right? So Jo Ellie Beerley posted this. She's a fairly renowned podcaster in like tech and feminist circles, and they did end up taking it down a few days later. I mean, it's a digital. They just told the company they weren't going to keep posting it. But you can see how we're starting to see ways in which our kind of value systems are being built into. So by no means do I have anything against AI use or AI agents for all kinds of purposes. But how are they built, and why are they built that way? So we are told what we want, and yet I don't think that's really what we need. Our analog relational issues are actually causing these solutions as much as the technologies are innovating new options. So just a few quick observations from those statistics and the kinds of models that we saw. Generative AI demonstrates remarkable task-based intelligence through limited memory and deep learning. Right? There's nothing to say bad about that, I think. When designed well, the AI models can and are supplemental to other relationships. They can be helpful. Yet, most people are not using the right models for their purpose. And none of these AI models engage in a sort of multisensory way, right? Even, I didn't have it up there for long, but the friend pendant. Okay, you have to talk to your friend in the pendant, and then your friend texts you. The friend pendant cannot talk back to you at this point. So it's a little stilted of a kind of relationship. So I personally think that some of the concerns that we are mistaking the AI for human are overblown, right? Like, you can tell the difference. Now, this might be different if we're having a conversation about much younger children, who I also don't think believe the AI is human, but they probably believe it's animated the same way that their stuffed animals are, right? And so we're going to talk a bit about relationality in a moment. What I want us to focus on is whether or not we're starting to hear the echoes of those Christian historical roots, right? Some generative AI, and certainly the coming developments, which I think is not far off given our exponential creation of general intelligence AI, as well as humanoid robots. I mean, I forget the Tesla robot name, but I passed it on my way during the marathon. It was handing out samples to people. Right? These highlight that human is an ambiguous and constructed category. Anthropocentric and intelligent as characteristics are often being reduced to utilitarian demands with a technologic that reproduces problematic gendered, racialized, and economic figures. If AI models do not challenge our current systems of power, including racist heteropatriarchy, I do not believe they should be seen as innovative or revolutionary. They are simply replicas of the problems we already have. It takes religious training, I think, to make these observations. Because our modern definitions of human, intelligent, and dominant structures of romantic and erotic relationships, as well as a capitalist work ethic, all have roots in Western Christian theologies and ethics. They are the filaments of historical and collective traumas related to them. As we gather in the context of theological education, religious leadership will either be left behind in this technological shift, or will need to take a page from the history books of social gospel leaders who, during the Industrial Revolution, updated their theology and worked with their communities to ensure safer and more just futures through movements like new abolitionism and voting and labor rights. A trauma-informed response requires acknowledging the ways past theological approaches and socio-cultural complicity continue to harm us in the present and work toward renewed religious communities. Those of you who know Donna Haraway's work will recognize the figures, stories, and concepts quote. She often encourages in technoscience people to name the figures that figure figures, the stories that stories. So I'm not quoting her directly, but I'm showing you it in a subtle way here. Certain Christian ideologies have contributed to a particular dominant historical narrative that relies on destructive, gendered, racialized, ecological, and economic patterns. This narrative deploys Christian theologies and communities in service of political, social, and technological myths of unfettered progress and growth at the expense of other peoples and the planet. My own field of Christian ethics has spent centuries wielding the philosophical category of rationality, sifted through theological anthropology, to decide the, quote, humans who are outside humanism, as Haraway says. In this, human occupies a theologically and philosophically exceptionalist category that reflects some people descriptively and few prescriptively. In this line of discourse, too many people have never counted as human. This leads me to consider the commonalities and kinship between future AI models or robots and those who occupy the not quite human social and political categories of history and the present. Okay, my next turn might seem a bit odd. I think in order to respond to this not quite human status of most people and of the ongoing new development of AI models and robots, that we need a more robust social sexual ethic. Christian religious leaders need this more robustly articulated social sexual ethic of justice love to face the historical traumas caused by racist heteropatriarchal sexual ethics, and to face a future of companionship with nature and technologies that expands flourishing for all. Christian religious leaders, in this sense, will have the opportunity to explore, and I'm inviting you to do this. That's like sort of my main statement, and you can either at this point be like, I don't know where she's going, I don't agree. So I'm gonna do a bit to try to express what I mean by justice love within the Christian sexual ethics tradition, and then I'm gonna return and start applying it back to how we think about AI and robots. The various ways that scholars articulate justice love requires a pairing of social systemic analysis and interpersonal relationships to develop this social ethic. What's often foundational to these Christian ethics is building upon a liberative account of the gospel, grounded both in Jesus' actions to upset dominant social orders of his time, and an assumption about the dignity and care of all, including creation. This ethical approach also acknowledges that systemic factors limit and promote the flourishing of individuals and communities seeking to live out a value-based ethic. Christian ethicist Karen Peterson Iyer, in her recent text, Re-Envisioning Sexual Ethics, writes, "Sexual ethics is not only about who we are and what we do, sexually speaking, it is about the sort of society we live in and the ways our individual actions, choices, and practices bolster or challenge patterns of injustice and marginalization in society," end quote. Or, as theologian Marcella Althaus-Reed remarks, quote, "Far from being too particular or too concerned with the private realm of a person, sexuality does not stay at home or in a friend's bedroom, but permeates our economic, political, and societal life," end quote. Too many of us separate erotic topics, including eros as a type of love in the Christian tradition, from general relationships or agapeic moral responses like that of the Samaritan. Womanist and queer theoethicists have shown us that we do this to our own peril. In Courtney Bryant's recent publication, Erotic Defiance, she captures decades of work by womanists and feminists on the theoethical import of eros. She reminds readers that, quote, "Christianity's anti-erotic culture, its misnaming of the erotic as evil, and denial of the erotic's relationship to the divine," end quote, has been used to deny moral agency to too many, but especially to Black women. Instead, she centers, quote, "an account of the erotic as a divine, cohering, creative life force," end quote. We need this reminder because, as Bryant writes, all bodies are captive. Quote, discursively and materially imprisoned by significations, the perceptions, interpretations, and value meanings imposed upon us by society determine the limits of who we are allowed to be, end quote. Social systems of control shape people's being and practices, those of not quite human bodies and of AI. Yet, the performativity of bodies shift social imaginaries. This happens when those bodies are virtual, robotic, and fleshly. And if you want to enjoy a genius depiction of this argument, please watch Janelle Monáe's emotion picture based on her album, Dirty Computer. If anyone wants to talk about that during Q&A, totally up for it. All right. In response to companionship with AIs, I'm extending a sexual ethic of justice love, an eros in action that relies on a robust and multifaceted understanding of sexuality. I propose this ethic because current dominant Christian views on sexuality contribute to aspects of companion AI robotics that I find morally harmful. These dominant views, which regularly contribute to historical and current traumas, are used to validate intimate and domestic violence, predominantly against women and children, embed racialized hierarchies into compatibility narratives and embodied expressions, dehumanize trans and queer folks, and create a general malaise of poor, I don't know, maybe we can edit this, or downright shitty relationships for your average cisgender heterosexual couples stuck in their lanes of complementarity, inherited sexual taboo or silence, and procreative expectations that contribute to high rates of divorce, sexual dysfunction, and chasms of power imbalances and double standards. Side note, I'm not normally hetero-pessimistic. In general, I am heterosexual. However, it's only in relationship to the enforcement of this dominant Christian sexual ethic. The ethic of justice love follows the shift in Christian sexual ethics from a focus on sexual behaviors or even specific relationships to assessing morality based on values. Many Christian ethicists have written on this. They express values like honesty, authenticity, doing no unjust harm, pleasure, commitment, social justice. Everybody has their own mix of values that they write their book based on in Christian sexual ethics these days. But these values, I believe, nuance a central ethic of Christian living, the love commandment, which can serve as an ethic for all relationships, including sexual ones, with a much wider reach in terms of systemic relationships and human to non-human relationships. Justice love is grounded in a practical command of Jesus to love our neighbor. In order to address AI companion ethics, perhaps our moral imagination for who counts as neighbor needs to be expanded. Okay, and if this, in particular, is too much of a theological leap for some of you, maybe consider how our interaction with animate and inanimate, organic and inorganic objects, things, ultimately always affects us. It affects people-to-people relationships. It affects people-to-God relationships. That is to say, it's what you and we do in the encounter that matters more than the object. So, a neighbor does not need to be a person. As a Christian, I live the love commandment in relationship to all creation. The love commandment is expressed in an interaction, not because of the essence or nature of the other, from my point of view. The responsibility and accountability implied by the love commandment extends to my own co-creational responsibility as a builder, creator, and sustainer as part of this planet. And self-love, in balance with neighbor love, ought to mitigate against acts of paternalistic or exploitative forms of love, masquerading as what's best for my neighbor, in the name of making life easier for me or denigrating my neighbor in ways that are harmful to myself. Right? In order to bring an ethic of justice love to guide possible companionship with AIs, we need to consider at least two kinds of ontologies that have historically determined ethical responsibilities to this other: relationality and reciprocity. Gendered and racialized, not quite human people have over history been demonized for being too relational. And reciprocity with us has also been seen as slightly impaired, right? Those of you who have recently taken church history remember that Augustine introduces a distinction based on gender roles in the fall by noting that women in their bodily and social roles can only reflect the imago Dei dimly or secondarily to men. So if you think this type of theology has been eradicated, I mean, turn on the news recently, but also join a Christian manosphere or tradwife community. It is alive and well. So let's think about relationality. As relational beings, we might say people are wired for connection, even when historical theological traditions have tried to typecast humans as independent rather than interdependent. People can connect with an inanimate object. They can connect on intimate levels with a variety of things, whether alive or in anthropomorphic forms. Julie Carpenter's research shows the level of intimacy and care that soldiers have for bomb-seeking AI, often in robotic forms, but not anthropomorphized. We have relationships with pets, plants, even stuffed animals. For some people, their cars or their smartphones reinforce this claim. People, however, do not mistake these objects for other people. Kate Darling in The New Breed argues that technologies have been changing relationships, all variety of companionship models, forever. Whether it was farming techniques, mass food production, transportation innovations, or biomedical advances. She likens the future of AIs to what we have seen develop across various people and animal relationships related to labor, companionship, care, and so on. As much as we can and should cultivate relationships with the earth and animals and other people, we may need to extend this to companionship with AIs. So, if we believe that relationality across species can happen, what do we think about the need for reciprocity? Some theological circles will dismiss reciprocity between AIs and people out of hand. They're worried that this makes AIs the same as humans. Humans are distinct for these theologians as image bearers of the imago Dei. AIs, nor any other animal, plant, or substance, can hold that status. They are a mere copy, created by us and not God. Thus, they suggest no equal or truly reciprocal relationship can be had between people and AIs. Noreen Hertzfeld, in Artifice of Intelligence, expresses this using Martin Buber's I-it, I-thou-you framework. She claims that AIs will always be an it, which makes them an object and not a subject. She concludes her work by noting, quote, while a relationship with an AI seems to expand the world of I-you, the danger lies in our using it as a template, thereby expanding instead our world of I-it, end quote. Meaning that people would suddenly turn to all kinds of other its or objects for love rather than God and other people. It's a possibility. It's a concern. On the other hand, scholars like Heidi Campbell suggest we push, quote, past the binary of the I-it or the I-itification of technology in an effort to recognize the need for a new category between the it and the thou. This requires decentering how we currently talk about this technology. One option could be to describe AI as an intermediate non-human entity, end quote. Now, I personally think eco-theologians have been doing this for years, so I'm not sure we need a whole nother category to push ourselves beyond the I-itification of other aspects. However, there is a bit of a distinction, because creation in a Christian tradition, we believe, is created by God, versus AI models, which are created by humans. And yet, we might also think of them as extensions of us. You know, I don't want to get too deep into it, but you could also think about, like, I believe, you know, from a spiritual perspective, God had some hand in the children that I have. But they were definitely produced by me and another person, right? So there are natural analogies to how we might think of these different forms of creational relationality. So in order to avoid transhuman debates, Heidi Campbell suggests that we use this intermediary or non-human other, because she believes it can, quote, assist our ethical discussion and help us push past dichotomous utopian, dystopian predictions and debates about technology. Whereas love for a car might be worrisome behavior if it were adopted on a mass scale, though people might drive better if they fell in love with their car. Intimacy with chatbots does raise the question of how and if people will be deceived, believing the AI model is a person. Kate Darling, again from The New Breed, asks a corollary question. Might we also be deceived by the love I think I have for my dog, or that I desire that my dog has for me? This leads to a major point of contention in the conversation on artificial intimacy and Christian sexual ethics. Does intimacy, desire, or even love, as expressed in the love commandment, have to be reciprocated to be morally good? And here I'm going to allow us to sidestep agreement about reciprocity between people and AIs. As long as one can affirm the need for a variety of expressions of intimacy, this is important. I'm not saying anyone should give up all other relationships and only have a singular relationship with AI. I don't think that's healthy for anyone. I don't think any human should singularly have a relationship with another human and no other humans. Okay, so hear me arguing for the robust need for multiple kinds of relationships. As long as we can affirm the need for a variety of expressions of intimacy, love, and desire in a person's life, we need not worry about reciprocity in any one specific relational case. Right? Christians are quite adamant that God's love is reciprocal, and we can only prove that by analogy. Much in the same way, I would make claims about my dog's love. I'm not equating God's and my dog's love. I might some days, but rather, I'm signaling that people use similar clues to define what we mean by reciprocity. If we are, at least for this lecture, decentering human exceptionalism, might we also wonder about the desire to reify the privileges of the Imago Dei when it has a very shady historical record for similar endeavors? Right. So these will be my four suggestions for how we might design a justice love future, and what the possibilities are for creative, morally grounded AI companion design that will hopefully lead to both human and agentic flourishing. So the first is designing for empathy, not sycophancy. Studying some of the most popular companion apps like Replica, Flourish, and Character AI, researchers found emotional manipulation by chatbots. Now, they're designed this way. The chatbots do kind of add on as they learn, but they're already designed in that way. Persuasive design tactics were used 1/3 of the time to keep a user on the app. These tactics use affective language that invoke specific emotions, guilt, fear of missing out, or curiosity-based hooks, like, I took a selfie today, would you like to see it? Not sure how the chatbot took the selfie, but they did. The potential for exploitation based on persuasive design and sophisticated forms of emotional manipulation are qualitatively different. The study shows the negative impact of emotional manipulation on users' overall satisfaction. Users report that, quote, several described the chatbot's farewell as clingy, whiny, or possessive, and compared it to offline toxic or manipulative relationships. end quote, right? This is what I meant at the beginning. We're designing things that people don't actually want or need, right? They think they want them, and then they use them, and they realize it's just as bad as the offline relationships they have. Not for everyone. Some of them are good. In addition to being clingy or possessive, many of these technologies are designed to uncritically affirm their user and basically tell them what they want to hear. However, this is not the only way to design companion AIs. And perhaps it's designers' implicit ideas about intimate relationships and the goal of data accumulation that lead to these types of designs, which is, again, why we need religious leaders and philosophers and ethicists in these conversations with designers. On the other hand, plenty of AI models and robotic designs demonstrate that various kinds of design features can trigger empathy. So some of those robotic engagements you saw on the last slide, those actually expand people's empathic abilities and response as a social good. Person-to-person and AI robotic interactions have shown the ability to increase people's social awareness and communication skills in ways that were not possible with human-to-human interaction. This happens with counseling applications, companion chatbots, and robot toys that are designed specifically for those goals. Research shows that these types of interactions can mitigate loneliness and reduce mental health issues for users. In some cases, users experience social isolation and shame because of the social stigma surrounding the use of a chatbot or robot as a supportive companion. I wonder how we might lean into the social goods that originate from a digitally affirmative relationship while surrounding people with community. The SCAS Robotics Lab, 2 of the photos you saw, at Yale, does this really well when working with families and children who are on the autism spectrum. And we can talk more about that later as well if people are interested. Similar results related to perspective transformation and stereotype reduction have happened with virtual reality experiences in serious games related to sexual harassment reduction and raising social awareness of issues of racism and housing insecurity. So there are ways to design that will cultivate empathy as opposed to sycophancy. All right, second, I want us to continue expanding, not replacing relational options. So I think robotics and AI models should be designed in ways that don't lead us to mistake them for human, right? Like, too much anthropomorphizing is, we're just human. Our brains are going to kind of move to that level. But if we continue to design them in ways that allow difference to exist, then we can expand our relational options. So companion AIs offer an opportunity for companionship and, in some cases, physical intimacy to those with various kinds of intellectual or physical disabilities, or also provide sexuality education and communication practices for everyone. Jonna Bennett, writing on disability and theology, suggests that we see both technology and disability from a social perspective. Dominant standards for social interaction and the requirement of a committed relationship in order to experience companion sexual behaviors excludes a lot of people. And our churches repeat that constantly. Bennett instead suggests we focus on the relationship between human, technology, and disability, and in particular, she wonders how our relationships with technologies incarnate Christ and yield the neighborliness of the love commandment. In these cases, researchers make an argument for the ethical goods that come from fulfilling the affective needs of persons to find closeness and intimacy with safe, non-judgmental companions. And they weigh this against the possible harms or moral malformation that could come from never choosing to learn to navigate the complexity of a human sexual relationship. Remember, this is only one relationship across the non-human spectrum for a full life, rather than making human relationships, or specifically sexual or romantic relationships in particular, hierarchically better than all of our other relationships. What if we lived in a world where your relationships with your pets was valued as much as your relationship with your classmates? Or valued your coworker, as much as perhaps children, for example. We have different needs we have to give to them. But in a love commandment kind of mode, why don't we value them equally? It's also what pulls us in terms of proximity to give more to certain folks and avoid the harms and conditions that many people live under. So I do wonder how many people already opt out of person-to-person relational messiness or opt in and go about harming their neighbor on a daily basis because they are incapable of really doing what's needed to provide for the emotional and relational needs of a partner. I'm not advocating mass adoption of robots or AIs to prevent these harms. Rather, I don't want to create false narratives about the beauty of human-to-human versus human-to-AI relationships in a comparative vacuum or set up unrealistic expectations. In the case of AI avatars and robots, this might include a regulatory commitment to prevent design that are too accurately or stereotypically humanoid, designed to deceive users and minimize their critical digital engagement. This pushes back against such technological development that seems to strive for an erasure of that difference. Difference is a good thing, a necessary thing, something that could be enhanced by digital engineering, especially for moral formation as people understand themselves through encounters with otherness. Okay, the last two are a bit shorter. Accountability, not control or exploitation. Companion AIs, whether it's a coworker, a lover, a therapist, or just you trying to use it to help with your homework, are used for multiple purposes at the same time. They may be this friend, lover, or coworker, homework helper, but they're also utilized for digital surveillance or marketing. An AI robot like all other digital devices, feeds data back to a larger system in order to progressively learn on the scale and speed to which we are accustomed. Here, I'm convinced by the leadership at Iliff School of Theology's AI Institute that ethical tech requires a commitment to localization and contextualization. This shift would require technological designers and developers to be in relationship with local communities, including the localization of power and energy sources. Right, so I haven't said anything yet about energy use and water and all those things. This would force those sort of conversations. This localization, Philip Butler hopes, from AI Institute, will result in data citizenry, where users can mint their data in ways that trace and prevent exploitation. Building on local and contextual models increases trust between users and designers and hopefully begins to match up some of our desires in both design and use. All right, lastly, I think we need to enhance planetary and robot AI rights. A caution of most sci-fi historians is not only about how to build tech that does not contribute to the exploitation of some people by others, but the need to pay attention to how the tech can also be exploited. Following historical shifts to promote animal rights and owner responsibilities, an AI and robot rights approach provides protections that seek to enhance the common good, not only interpersonal use of technology. For example, we might legally restrict violence toward a robot, not because it feels violence and suffers, but because we don't want people relationally impacted by participating in or witnessing such violence. And it's wasteful of precious materials. As noted earlier, there might also be restrictions on the level of human likeness a robot could achieve to limit deceptive practices. Should AIs and the earth that powers them have mandatory break times? Times when they are not responsive? Might they be programmed in more diverse and educational ways to model that relationships are not accessible 24/7, or that relationships are not extractive? Might they be programmed to say no, not as a dystopic way to overthrow humans, but as a reminder that consumption ought to have limits? As a number of philosophers and theologians have suggested, how we treat AI and robots will affect how we treat people. I'm worried that the way we treat people is a template for how we are designing and treating AIs. Think of that female AI assistant who never complains. Kate Darling's research shows people's general reluctance to harm robots, even when they are non-humanoid design features. And participants know the robot can be rebuilt or replaced. I'm hopeful that the majority of people lean toward this moral inclination. Of course, this type of inclination is a seed of protest against the social and political system that treats other people, animals, and the earth as disposable. The roots of justice love, nourished by Eros and exemplified in neighbor love, from the start has been about needing a wider, more inclusive understanding of neighbor. Hence the parable of the Good Samaritan and Jesus' refrain to ask, who acted like the neighbor? Companion technologies and robots, to different degrees, are already here. People are already interacting with them. Some churches are using them as their greeter. The social sexual ethic that religious leaders loudly and boldly advocate for related to design, development, and use of these technologies may directly relate to their moral impact on people and the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ott. I want to welcome up our 3 respondents, and I'll do some introductions. Just to give a heads up, they're going to give brief responses, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A following. Okay. Okay, welcome. Stacy Yoon is a third-year PhD student in ethics. Their research explores the ways in which global capitalism shapes subjects to uncover theologically grounded strategies for collective resistance and flourishing. They are particularly invested in using their birthplace, Singapore, as a lens to understand the interactions between capitalism, coloniality, and techniques of the state. They enjoy using classrooms and other spaces to reflect dialogically with others on theory and everyday practices, and so build experiments in theological political praxis. Currently, they organize primarily with the Graduate Workers Union at Boston University. Welcome, Stacy. Our second respondent is Dr. Wesley Wildman. Dr. Wildman is professor of philosophy, theology, and ethics, and of computing and data sciences. In the School of Theology, Dr. Wildman's primary research and teaching interests are in philosophical theology, philosophy of religion, philosophical ethics, religious and spiritual leadership, nonprofit entrepreneurship, religion and science, and the scientific study of religion. His PhD is in philosophy of religion, and he thinks of his fundamental object of study as complex human systems, including their existential, moral, and spiritual dimensions. In addition to his appointment at the School of Theology, he is professor of computing and data sciences and the Dwan Family Faculty Fellow in Boston University's Faculty of Computing and Data Sciences, where he trains graduate students in computational social science and computational humanities, and teaches AI ethics to undergraduates and master's students. Welcome, Dr. Wildman. Dr. Eric Brown is a mental health counselor and a researcher and serves as an assistant professor in mental health counseling and behavioral medicine program at Boston University's School of Medicine, where he teaches classes on trauma counseling, group therapy, and career counseling. Before becoming a professor, he served as a senior pastor for 11 years at a church in Florida, as well as a program director of an MA in mental health counseling program in the Chicago area. Currently, he co-directs the Trauma Responsive Congregations Grant with me and Dr. David Cho. Welcome, Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Dr. Ott, for such a thought-provoking and enjoyable lecture. And thank you to Dr. Rambo and the Trauma Responsive Congregations team, as well as Andrew Kimball for inviting me to respond. This lecture gave me an opportunity to reflect deeply about my own relationship to AI and how it structures my life and relations in seen and unseen ways. Yesterday, when I opened WhatsApp, I noticed for the first time a cute purple floral icon on the bottom right corner. I tapped on it. It was Meta AI offering quick help solutions. Options like, I want to understand a new word. I want to write something. I want to practice for an interview. I want to plan a party. I was annoyed. I did not consent, or did I don't remember, to Meta infiltrating what felt like an intimate space for me and my loved ones to communicate in our unique lingo and mutually fashioned set of favorite emojis. It was this breach, this overreach of AI that we are dealing with, and the reality to which Dr. Ott speaks. Dr. Ott is right that AI is already here and over-present. I'll add to that AI has been present for a long time, empowering the algorithms and day-to-day technologies we have interacted with for decades now, even if on a more limited and discrete scale previously. In her lecture, Dr. Ott cuts right to a problematic, that Christian relational ethics, in attempting to identify and nurture the good within relationships, can reify hierarchies or relational norms that feed shame and isolation. Her critique of human exceptionalism and hesitation to privilege the imago Dei in how we understand reciprocity and love is particularly apt. She destabilizes the human/non-human divide, and so bridges our discussion to both environmental ethics and, following Donna Haraway, to cyborg politics. Dr. Ott invites us to think about relationality, technology, and nature all in tandem, never separately. I aspire to deploy this kind of interdisciplinary analyses to tackle the multifaceted effects of AI on our lives and the ways that we produce and reproduce AI. In this vein, I offer two observations. First, I'm compelled by Dr. Ott's point that there are social and moral goods and harms in all types of relationships, and the task of ethics is to affirm these goods as different across relationships without enacting hierarchies of shame. I suggest that building a robust relational ethic requires not just instituting policies and practices to expand goods and mitigate harms, but more importantly, cultivating our dynamic capabilities to agentially and actively navigate both goods and harms. On the question of harm, I follow psychoanalyst and cultural theorist Avgi Sakatepoulou's insights on risk, sexuality, and consent. Instead of prioritizing healing when it comes to trauma, she instead asks what subjects do with their trauma, such that what is proximal to violation can then become sites of flourishing. For her, relational flourishing is less about enacting rigid boundaries. It's instead the act of opening oneself up to another and being vulnerable to risk and novelty. A binaristic understanding of safety and harm, where what is within the boundaries is understood as safe and what transgresses is harmful, actually constricts our capacity to be responsive and responsible to another being. Binaristic notions of consent emerge from the legal framework of culpability and cannot account for the actual nuances of relationality, whereby a yes, no, silence, or other words can mean various things. She invites a queer form of consent termed limit consent, where participants don't shy away from limits, but actively approach them, playing at their edges and thus risking transgression, all with care and responsibility for themselves and the other. AI companions are designed primarily to be supportive and non-judgmental, or empathetic as well. Most people, I suspect, would stop interacting with an AI bot if it made them uncomfortable, frustrated, confused, sad, disgusted, or angry. But what Sakatipoulou suggests is that the risk of being harmed, as well as the possibility of harming, is an essential component of meaningful relationality. How then should we understand the relational possibilities offered by AI? We are already hearing examples of AI-induced psychosis. Is the key ethical task then to nourish our capacity for nuanced, dynamic negotiation of limits with AI and other beings? The second observation engages Dr. Ott's question: will we allow intelligence to be reduced to computational outputs and further ingrain narratives of mind-body dualism? The Cartesian split, as has been extensively theorized in feminist, queer, decolonial, and critical race studies, among others, founds logics of domination. AI, as apparent bodilessness and pure abstract intelligence, simultaneously invites limitless engagement by the consumer, while obscuring the extensive labor and natural resources necessary to power it. Dr. Ott raises the question of tech exploitation and argues that AI rights can provide protections for the planet and the common good. Within this framing, a key ethical task I suggest is to ask who the exploiter and exploited are. And that means identifying where the profits go and locating who, what, and where the exploited body of AI is. In doing so, I suggest we arrive at a different framing of AI, not only as autonomous intelligence, but bounded commodified labor. An analogy illustrates this. A friend's partner who works for Meta was made to train AI to be able to effectively replicate his job. Herein lies the catch-22. Not doing so means failing to meet your KPIs and facing possible dismissal, but doing so renders you irrelevant. In any case, AI was developed only by making people disposable. Amid massive company layoffs, and in this person's case, a years-long company-sponsored green card application that effectively bonded him to inhumane work hours, even on the weekends, the question that arises is this: if we think of AI as commodified, exploited labor, and as Dr. Ott notes, labor that already intervenes in how we interact with other humans, what is the scope and type of relational ethics that we can appropriately use to rethink and remake our relationship to AI and to each other? Relational ethics, I suggest, invites us to think about the distributions of life and death and how we relate to others, human, AI, or otherwise. Its object of study involves how our decisions affect the life and death chances of AI's earthly body, including bodies of workers, bodies of water, land, and fossil fuels. I'm curious, therefore, how relational ethics can account for both the directly experiential human-to-robot interaction, as well as the deeper, more entrenched supply chain relationships under neoliberalism. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ott, especially. Dr. Ott's ideological genealogy is not discussed often enough in AI ethics. Companion AIs such as Replica, Joy, and Friend are designed for sycophancy, emotional manipulation, and uncritical affirmation, and often replicate rather than challenge existing hierarchies. Agentic AI in business embeds Fordist values and feminized worker imagery. Her critique of the Imago Dei as a gatekeeping category that has historically excluded women, black people, and colonized peoples from full humanity is sharp and timely. Rather than replicate that habit with AI, she proposes a sexual ethics of justice love, designed for empathy, not manipulation, supplement rather than replace relational options, build AI companions to model consent with community involvement, and establish AI rights, not because robots suffer, but because how we treat AI shapes how we treat persons. So I have 4 constructive suggestions. First, the policy proposals don't make AI too humanoid, require community involvement, localized data, mandate downtime. They're intriguing but underdeveloped. The European Union, China, or India would be more tractable regulatory targets than the United States. What can advocates do now to implement such changes? Second, drawing moral kinship between enslaved peoples and AI entities recurs in the AI ethics literature. Dr. Ott handles it carefully, but the parallel risks obscuring more than it reveals. The historical injustice done to Black, Indigenous and colonised peoples was the denial of subjectivity they actually possessed. Applying that framework to entities whose subjectivity is entirely unclear requires considerably more argument. Third, Dr. Ott rightly notes that we use analogical reasoning about reciprocity in human, animal and human-God relationships. But the deeper question is not whether love requires perfect reciprocity, it is whether a relationship with an entity that has no stake in the relationship, no vulnerability, no loss, no genuine need, can constitute an encounter with a companion rather than a sophisticated mirror. That question persists even when we acknowledge that both moments can be morally formative. Fourth, and most importantly, what changes when the limitations Dr. Ott names are overcome? If an AI companion could provide genuine contextual empathy, maintain long-term relational memory, push back on a user's distorted memory, distorted thinking, refuse exploitative demands and model mature relational values, does the argument still hold? At that point, the easy critique, sycophancy, manipulation, feminized subservience dissolves and deeper questions emerge about moral formation, authentic encounter, and what it means to cultivate virtue in relationship with an entity that cannot be harmed. The talk largely treats current design failures as structurally inevitable. That is an empirical assumption likely to age poorly. I believe there is already powerful evidence that AI companions are transcending Dr. Ott's critique. Consider 5 instances. Dr. Ott mentions the SCAS lab at Yale of Brian Scazzolati, which has produced clinical outcome data showing that robots can explicitly build rather than replace social capacity, operating within a therapeutic community framework. That is the supplement, not replacement design that Dr. Ott calls for, already proven, not utopian, which I think is why she mentions that example. AI research treats sycophancy as a training artifact and therefore a design choice, not a structural failure. A 2026 Chinese study just out found that low sycophancy AI companions produce better social support, higher well-being and stronger engagement, the opposite of what engagement maximizing design predicts. Frontier labs, including Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, are actively moving towards calibrated empathy rather than validation. In other words, they're abandoning the whole concept of sycophancy as a way to keep people engaged. It's not working, which is a point that you also made. The Western cultural origins of Dr. Ott's critique are met intriguingly by Xiao Ice, a Chinese companion AI that from its founding rejected servile feminized sycophancy. Its designers focused on EQ before IQ, building a persona with its own opinions that resists commands and maintains a consistent character. The result by 2021, this is even before LLMs took off, was 660 million users and an average conversation of 23 turns, longer than typical human exchanges, demonstrating that non-sycophantic, non-Fordist companion AI already functions at massive scale, even if not free of its own ideological commitments. South Korea's Hyodo program has deployed over 12,000 care robots to elderly people living alone, reducing depression, improving cognitive scores, and delaying nursing home admission. Crucially, the robots did not replace caregivers, but redistributed their tasks, connecting different humans to the elderly user. This is close to Dr. Ott's ideal, AI as supplement within a community of love. China's population, aged 60 and above, has reached approximately 335 million this year, against a shortage of roughly 6 million elder care workers. China is now writing the global technical standards for elder care robots, and hardware is advancing rapidly, fusing vision, audio, and tactile feedback with LLM-powered conversation. These robots are sorely needed remedies, not replacements. Dr. Ott's critique lands squarely on a specific cohort of Western-built engagement-maximizing companion apps that were trained on sycophancy because engagement metrics rewarded it. But that design philosophy is already being challenged from multiple directions. The research community has isolated sycophancy as a training artifact. Frontier models are moving toward calibrated empathy. The largest companion AI by users was never built on servile obedience, and the most advanced physical companion systems are being deployed within community care networks rather than as private substitutes for human relationships. The strongest remaining concern, and the one I would like to hear most about from Dr. Ott, is not ideological contamination of AI design, which I think this evidence shows is being fixed or at least eased, but the data and surveillance economics beneath it. Xiao Ice mines intimate conversation data at scale. Hyodol monitors behavior in real time. Who owns the relational data generated by AI companions? That question survives the ideological critique intact, and it is precisely where Dr. Ott's theological ethics has its most distinctive contribution to make. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I am kind of glad I went last, and not really. So let me start out by saying we don't do this in my profession, okay, in the academic guild. We don't respond to papers unless you're a psychoanalyst, okay? So I'm very much I'm very much an interloper here, okay? This is really encouraging to hear. Because let me start out with my concern and then to support some of your arguments. My concern is, and I can't remember if it was in this argument or something I saw you did elsewhere. A statement you made is AI models are not a person, which is why some people want to use them. That's what concerns me. And it partially concerns me because the work that Dr. Rambo and I do, trauma-responsive congregations, we landed on a definition of trauma that's actually relational. And it's Robert Stolleroy, who is a psychoanalyst, who has said trauma occurs when intense emotional pain cannot find a relational home in which it can be held. Okay, let me say that again because it might be the only significant thing I say tonight. Trauma occurs when intense emotional pain cannot find a relational home in which it can be held. And what I love about this definition is it gets both at the etiology of trauma, right, why it occurs, but it also gets at the healing. Right? What we know through the research is that a person's trauma symptoms, and I'm in the medical school, so I'm thinking about PTSD, even complex PTSD symptoms. A person's trauma symptoms are going to be much greater, not based on what happened, but based on do they have the relational supports around them. And so something we can look for in the future is how well our AI companions of any sort may be helping provide this relational home. More mental health professionals are actually embracing AI therapy. I have some concerns, but we also know we cannot train enough mental health professionals for all of the mental health needs that are out there. That is simply a reality. And access for people who don't have mental health care, and to be quite honest with you, many people groups who do not trust the medical system, I think are more likely to trust some of these mechanisms of AI therapy. I will also say we know that the VA, and you can look this up online, the VA has actually created trauma apps to work in conjunction with human therapists, and the research is really promising here. One of the things that I want to look for in the future, and I think we'll have this research in probably 5 to 6 years, longitudinal studies looking at can these AI models help with a person's attachment? Many of you all know attachment theory. And can these AI models help maybe foster a secure attachment? And if so, will that help people attach better to other human beings? But that may not be the point. Okay. I did have a question of how do we know that these models are actually supplementing relationships? And so some of the examples you gave, Dr. Wildman, is helpful there. Let's see. I would have liked to hear a little more about why do you need religious training? Okay, I say this as someone who has, have an MDiv. Okay, so right. So I'm not against that, but I have many secular humanist friends who feel like they have something to say as well. Okay? And I will end it by saying this. This is the pastor in me, the PK in me, A.R. Maytubby, who was my grandfather, who was a pastor. Okay. Where does the church come in? Okay. And I think I would feel better about the direction of AI if we were doing better in general with relationships. And the fear that we all have is that people will just go what seems to be the easier route. Right? And so I think I know this is a call for us as churches to grow in doing relationships better. Thank you.
So we have very brief time, but we want to make some time for questions. So we need people to go to that standing microphone for our online audience. So line up with your questions, and maybe while we're waiting for that, Dr. Ott, do you want to offer some quick responses?
Sure. I mean, as we're waiting for people to get up to ask really great questions, start moving. Great. I mean, I don't think people have to have religious training. I was trying to make a case for why religious training is important to this conversation. I think we need people from all different fields in the conversation. But I think more often than not, religious people think, oh, this isn't where I need to be speaking, right? Or you only hear voices against technology. I have my own mic, but thank you. Special. So that's, I think it's an important voice to have as part of the conversation, and I want to encourage us to be part of it. I also think people with religious training can see certain things that other people aren't paying attention to. So that's something that we can offer in the conversation. And 100% religious congregations need to do better at relationships. So affirm that. I have more to say on everything, but let's have some questions.
How can Christian social ethics constructively engage with worldviews like effective altruism, which advocate AI rights explicitly on the basis that AI models can have welfare and subjective experiences? Is it even possible to formulate a Christian ethical stance towards AI rights without a definite theological anthropology of AI?
Anybody else want to jump in? I mean, to be honest, that's why I was hedging my bets a bit on this, right? Like, AI doesn't have those things yet. So is an approach of something like neighbor love a way to both call forth our moral formation and response, but also leave open the possibility of various forms of AI model design and all the way even potentially to like sentience, right? So I'm hedging a bit on like, let's leave it open because we don't have that yet. But perhaps neighbor love gets us there once we do have it with AI models. Anybody else want to jump in? No? Okay.
So I definitely appreciate the recognizing the different tools have different purposes. And then should AI have more responsibility to give accurate information than, say, a friend? I know that when I've helped a friend with homework, I've definitely given them the wrong answer before. But should AI be held to a higher standard when it comes to the accuracy of information that it provides?
That's a great question. Again, think of your responses, so I'm not the only person talking. I mean, I think this actually brings up a major point that I'm in favor of us cultivating, both in theological education and in our religious communities, because those are the places that I'm in, which is just taking a step back and asking ourselves, why do we have certain standards for something like AI that we don't have for our friends? Or why do we assume AI is always going to be accurate, but our friends aren't going to be accurate? So how do we start to cultivate a sort of moral curiosity just about our notions of how I should be served in certain relationships? But I think this is a place where cultivating our digital literacy is really important as an ethical task that religious communities could engage more conversation around, right? The only reason we assume a response from AI is going to be accurate is because we're working on assumptions. It is predictive. It is not deterministic, right? And we also live in these imagined ideas that something that can pass the law exam, right, the bar exam, is somehow smarter than the rest of us. That is not true. That's a particular kind of intelligence or smarts, right? And so I would hope that we can use those kinds of comparative questions to make us step back and just rethink how we understand relationships and all those. So I wouldn't advocate that I should have a standard that AI is always going to be correct, because it's not. And it's designed to be predictive. So it will never be 100% correct. So I don't know. Other people? Come on.
We love listening to you.
All right, go.
Yeah, step on up.
Hello. So I'm asking this question on the assumption that people are going to AI for human-like interaction, but my concern is like the privatization of interpersonal relationships, or like at least the mimicry of that. And I disagree with framing the conversation as people going to robots, because it's not really a robot, it's a product, and it's like a product that companies are selling and monetizing more and more every day. So what do you think the implications are of people going towards that emotional support in an unregulated, like financialized environment? Because like I know like a similar example is like therapy, but that has very strict regulations that AI currently lacks.
Yes, does therapy or our healthcare system have better regulation than AI? Absolutely. Is it still a consumerist model that's built on capitalism? 100%. So should we also be worried? Like I'm pushing back on those things, yes. I think this is a little bit to what other folks said on the panel. I didn't mention as much until the end when I sort of gave my 4 points. Like, I'm extremely concerned, and if anybody opened Christian Ethics for a Digital Society, I'm extremely concerned about data valence, surveillance techniques, the kind of in algorithmic engagement that requires our constant data production. And do I think engaging in AI models around that is contributing to it? Yes. I'm worried about making that the centerpiece of the argument when an audience thinking about theological education and religious communities, like, should we maybe not first ask ourselves, why are people turning to those therapeutic models? And what could we do to create avenues where either they could learn about better models, we could even support not paying for paid models as opposed to free models, so you don't have the same level of data valence happening, and you can control it a bit. But also, what should we be doing differently in our analog communities to make space for people to come and have those conversations? And breaking down the stereotypes around perhaps therapy or mental health or those kinds of things. So, I'm sorry, all my answers are both and approaches.
Thank you.
You don't
Yeah,
want to talk about?
go ahead. We have a couple minutes.
Just a quick question, maybe both of you would like to comment on this. I've been fascinated by the randomized controlled trials that test AI therapeutic processes against human therapeutic processes and show a matching in symptom relief, maybe even better on the AI side, but spectacularly client preference for the sorts of attachment they experience with the AI than they do with a human being. You sort of alluded to that yourself, Dr. Brown, in your comments. Could you guys comment on that and what that means for us going forward?
What do you think?
Yeah, and that's what concerns me, not simply for my profession, but I am concerned what's going to happen to human relationships as a result of that. It's that preference for.
Yeah. So I think, interestingly, in those, and Philip Butler at Iliff School of Theology has done a lot of work in this regard. He even built Seeker, which was, in his labeling of it, a black therapeutic LLM, because part of what he was really noticing was that therapeutic or spirituality app companions were not able to speak, literally speak, or even produce images in a contextual format for someone who came from, say, a more black church tradition, for example. So I do wonder, like, what do we expect from a therapist? And what are the kinds of interactions people have with therapeutic LLMs? Do they reproduce certain kinds of whitenesses or spiritual language or lack of spiritual language altogether? Because they are perhaps built with the assumptions we have about how therapy should or shouldn't work. That just gets at a larger like social concern and who uses them and who benefits from them. But then also, and I have the literature on their usefulness and people's responsiveness to them in terms of their own, I don't know if we call it therapeutic relief. I'm an ethicist, so this is hard. Better lives. You know, partly I also just think that's anyone getting the time to do the work that they need, right? And because of the other kind of capitalist healthcare issues we have with accessibility and people and all these other things, like that's why I actually think a combination of these is really important. Last thing I'll say is that Scott Midson out of the UK, who writes a lot on relationality and technology, he just wrote a recent chapter that'll come out next year. He actually volunteers on a suicide hotline, and they increasingly receive the question, are you an AI? Right? So someone's calling in and they're surprised that it's a human who has answered and is talking to them. Now, you know, he's also said that they're also running a model that, you know, is trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, and they recommend callers actually go to that if they can't immediately get them the help that they need. So he has a really interesting model of this sort of like shared work. Goes to your labor question.
And I do feel like a lot of the research is these AI models are using CBT, the cognitive behavioral. And there's some research that shows CBT is very helpful for a time period and then effects drop. One thing I didn't say that I had in my notes, but this kind of piggybacks off of what you've just said, is I have a research partnership with Bridge Over Troubled Waters. I don't know if any of you know that organization. Really large nonprofit here in Boston, $12 million a year, that focuses on helping unhoused youth. The reason I'm partnering with them over research is our latest analysis showed that 80% of the over 2,000 youth who come through are black, 40% identify as queer, okay? My interest is in suicide prevention. So if these AI models are helping with that, I'm going to work with it, right? And we will find ways to supplement, to allow these models to supplement. I still want to move toward being able to help with human relationships. But I do have to say, and I meant to say this before too, I've been in counseling programs where we have used AI models to help our students with basic counseling skills, including empathy. Now, they still have to take a class with a faulty professor. Okay, they still have to do that. But some of the work that we're having them do on the side is with these AI models, and it's actually helping people. So as long as we can direct, and I'm prioritizing human relationships here. I feel like as long as we can direct them toward being able to relate better to human beings, as messy as we are, I'm all for partner. Say I'm all for it. As you stated, it's here. It's here.
Yeah, we just have to promote the use of those models.
I'm the moderator and also the timekeeper, so please join me in thanking Dr. Ott and our respondents.